All right. Well, that is going. I'm going to transition now to our Zoom. Welcome everyone to our workshop on ranked choice voting. My name is Hexel Colorado. I'm the president of Humanity Forward Texas. We are currently now streaming on Facebook and on YouTube. And so this recording will be available later for your viewing. Today we have this meeting to talk about ranked choice voting in Texas, what it's going to take to bring it to our state, to legislate on it. We have a number of guests who are going to help introduce us to the topic, help explain what it is, how it works. Our guest speakers today are Kennedy Logsdon, representing Humanity Forward Texas in Dallas. Kennedy was the leader of the Dallas Yang Gang during the Andrew Yang campaign. She's hosted dozens of policy workshops, coffee socials, and she helped organize the rally when Andrew Yang was in town. And so with Humanity for Texas, she's kind of bringing that passion and focus to our organization and helping us give us a policy focus and help drive this group towards action. We also have Harriet Wasserstrum. Am I pronouncing that correctly, Harriet?
Yep, that works.
Perfect. Harriet is the co-founder of Ranked Choice Voting in Texas. They started over a year ago now in June 2019 with a focus on and with a mission of promoting ranked choice voting in Texas at the county, state, and even federal level. Is that right? We go through all levels of government?
Eventually.
Eventually. All right. And so Harriet will be talking about her organization's effort to promoting ranked choice voting, what they've accomplished so far, as well as what does the roadmap look like to bringing ranked choice voting to Texas in the near future and in the coming months, and how you guys can get involved in supporting that. And lastly, our third speaker for today is Terry Meza. Terry Meza is the state rep for House District, oh shoot, I'm blanking. For Irving, Texas. And I know I should have had my script in front of me, but she is our state representative who has previously proposed bills for ranked choice voting to the Texas House, as well as 9 other election reform bills, including same-day registration and countywide voting. She will be speaking about her experience with the political process of pushing a bill forward, as well as what is she willing to do in the near future to help us bring this legislation to reality. During this program, we will hear from each of our speakers, and then after each speaker has spoken, we'll have a Q&A session where we talk about some of the details of ranked choice voting, the legislative process, and how we bring it to reality in the near months. If you haven't already, I encourage you to follow Humanity Forward Texas on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter. You can also go to our website, humanityforwardtexas.org, where you can sign up for our newsletter, and you can get all of our updates and blog posts there. We also encourage you to sign up at RCV4Texas.org. Wait, let me make sure that's right. RCV4Texas.org, where you can also sign up for the quarterly newsletter from Harriet's organization. And there you'll get direct information about what we're doing specifically with ranked choice voting, as well as tools for how to contact your representative. They have email templates and letter writing campaign templates to help us get the support that we need to make this happen. With that, I think that's everybody introduced. I'm going to go ahead and start with our first speaker, Kennedy Logsdon, on behalf of Humanity Forward Texas. Kennedy is going to explain ranked choice voting, what it is, and how it works. Kennedy, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Hexel. Yeah, so what is ranked choice voting? It's kind of what I'll be talking about. I'm just going to give the big overview to y'all. So I'm going to start with an example. So in 1992, the 3 presidential candidates were Ross Perot, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush. So let's say you and 100 other people are going to go into this election and figure out which president you want. Now, you really like Ross Perot. He's your favorite. And you're okay with Bill Clinton, but you certainly don't want to elect George Bush. I'm forcing your choices on you for this example. And so when you go to vote, you rank Ross Perot as your number one choice. You say Clinton is your number two choice, and you don't cast a vote at all for George Bush. In the first round of voting, let's say Perot only gets 19 votes, Bush gets 37 votes, and Clinton gets 44. Since Perot has the lowest number of votes, he's removed from the vote for future voting cycles. So that means your vote now shifts to your number two choice, which is Bill Clinton. And if he gets 6 votes or more, he gets 50% of the vote, which is a simple majority, and he wins the election. So Hexel, I don't know if you want to point or put up the graphic that I sent you, if you could. It's a good visual aid. And so you can do this with any number of candidates. So in that case, there was 3 candidates. The max number of rounds of shifting your ranked choice around would have been 2. But if you had, 15 candidates, you could have a maximum or you could have a maximum of 14 rounds, and so on and so forth. It stops when someone gets 50% of the vote, because obviously, you can't get more than 50%, and so that majority wins you the whichever election you're running for. So that's how it works. In practice, there's actually 18 U.S. cities, 1 U.S. state, which is Maine, 4 countries, and a handful of private organizations that already utilize ranked choice voting. The Academy Awards actually uses ranked choice voting when picking their leadership. So today I'm just going to talk about Maine and Ireland are the big 2. So Ireland has had ranked choice voting since 1919. In the 100 years since it's been around, there's been a lot of benefits from it. For instance, Ireland experienced a huge economic boom ever since it implemented ranked choice voting, but it was left particularly vulnerable to the 2008 financial collapse, but it recovered better than most nations who were facing similar issues. And it took another hit in 2011, the Irish economy did, and that was an election year. And through ranked choice voting, the people of Ireland decided that they wanted better leadership in their parliament, and of 166 seats, 45 sitting members, like incumbents, were defeated, leaving a near majority of 76 new members. And those new members included a modest number of candidates from independent and minor parties, because in that election, no single district elected representatives from only one party. So that's like every county in the United States elected someone who was both a Democrat and a Republican, is kind of a way to analogize that, which is a great reflection of saying, like, where we live doesn't determine exactly what our political interests are. And it doesn't just work in Europe. So the state of Maine has been debating the issue of ranked choice voting since 2001. In 2016, voters approved the implementation of ranked choice voting. And so far, it's been implemented at the state and local levels, but will hopefully be implemented fully for all federal elections as well, barring the loss of, a few lawsuits that have been filed against it. So far, an overwhelming number of the population supports ranked choice voting in Maine, and that number has only grown the longer the system has been implemented. One of the strangest effects that we've seen coming from the implementation of ranked choice voting is civil campaigning. And so residents of Maine have actually seen their politicians switch from ad hominem character attacks to friendlier banter and more civil discussion of policy. And that's because many minority candidates can team up to try to beat the incumbent, effectively saying, hey, vote for me, and if you're not going to vote for me, vote for my friend here. And so the system of ranked choice voting really begins to fundamentally change the way that we're used to participating in politics. And with that kind of overview, I'll turn it over to our next speaker, or Hexel, or Q&A.
Great, thank you, Kennedy. That was a great explanation. And so our next speaker is Harriet Wasserstrum with Ranked Choice Voting for Texas. So her organization has a history of trying to bring ranked choice voting to Texas at different levels. And so with that, I'm going to stop the share so you guys can see Harriet. And Harriet, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Hexel. So my story is that I have gotten increasingly frustrated by how partisan our political environment has become. And I don't think that the 2 major parties are going to heal themselves. So what I think is needed is really a change in voting logistics. And ranked choice voting isn't a silver bullet that will solve everything, but I think it's an important first step. So I started looking to see what could get done in Texas last July when I gathered a group of people to find out who was willing to join forces and get ranked choice voting adopted in Texas. So ranked choice voting for Texas was set up as a Texas domestic nonprofit organization last October, and we now have about 600 supporters. So there's a history of trying to get ranked choice voting in Texas. Back in 2001, the city of Austin tried to use ranked choice voting to elect city council members. And the Texas Secretary of State at the time ruled that ranked choice voting was not consistent with winning by majority, as is required by the Texas Election Code. And that opinion was later confirmed by the then Attorney General, who happens now to be our governor. So to get ranked choice voting adopted in Texas now, one of three things has to happen. Either we need a new Attorney General interpretation, or we need to pass a local initiative and sue to get it implemented, or we need legislation to amend the Texas Election Code and explicitly allow for ranked choice voting. And it's the last path that we think has the most promise. So two bills were introduced in the 2019 session, including one to use ranked choice voting in primaries. And that was the bill that was co-sponsored by Representative Meza, who will speak shortly. The second bill that was introduced in 2019 covered municipal elections, and we plan to beef up that effort in the 2021 session by adding a third bill, which would cover military and overseas voters. So hopefully we'll gain more traction. The military and overseas voter bill is really interesting to me because you certainly don't want to disenfranchise our military voters who don't necessarily have enough time to get a runoff ballot in time. So that might be a way really to get some more attention paid to the issue of ranked choice voting in what is sometimes considered to be a more conservative legislature. So I think it's really important to get bipartisan support for the legislation, which is really why I like the military bill. And our plan is to work hard to identify additional sponsors for each of the three bills. This time, we plan to have a real grassroots campaign where voters will be contacting their legislators, asking them to support bills once they're introduced. So what Hexel said earlier was that we have tools on our website helping you write letters, but in fact, we're going to do it a little differently. We're going to be using an app that's called Convo, and each of our supporters will receive a 4-question survey. And based on their answers to the survey, a sort of customized letter gets generated and will be automatically sent to their House and Senate representatives. So I think that building a network of supporters is really important. And unfortunately, it's become a little bit more of a challenge in the age of COVID-19 because we are now on a totally digital strategy. But that's our plan. And what I'd like to do, Kennedy did a good introduction of what ranked choice voting is, but I'd like to spend a few minutes just stressing the benefits of ranked choice voting. So Hexel, if you could put up that slide, that would be great.
Yep. Yeah, go ahead and keep talking while I pull
so
up.
Especially in fiscally concerned Texas, especially in fiscally concerned Texas, ranked choice voting reduces the cost of elections, both for election administrators and for candidates. Also, if there's increased voting by mail, ranked choice voting reduces postage costs by eliminating the mail and by eliminating the runoffs. And then in this time of concern over social distancing, voters can avoid returning to the polls for unnecessary additional elections. And runoffs especially are often problematic because historically candidates get elected based on low voter turnout. And with ranked choice voting, you don't have a runoff because there's an instant runoff based on your initial ballot. So my big concerns with politics today really have to do with partisanship. So evidence from other venues indicates that candidates work to attract voters with whom they may not be their first choice, but they really want the second and third choices of those voters as well. And that way the ultimate winner is really chosen with broader support. And I think that's really important. And then lots of people complain about the spoiler effect when a third party candidate enters a race. Kennedy talked about the role that Perot played in the election. Well, with ranked choice voting, as she described, it really doesn't make any difference, because what happens is if that third party candidate doesn't get a majority of the votes and gets eliminated, then each voter's second choice candidate will get their vote. So that just means that more candidates can compete without fear of splitting the vote among candidates with similar positions. And that way we really can elect someone who represents the majority. So cities that are scattered around the US, and Kennedy referred to 18 cities using ranked choice voting. Some of them have used it for decades, and they report that campaigning really is less negative. There are fewer nasty ads because candidates have reason to be more civil and issue focused because they want to gain voters' second or third choice votes. So one thing that Texas Democrats can really appreciate after Super Tuesday this year is that if you vote early, either in person or by mail, ranked choice voting enables your vote to count even if a candidate drops out before Election Day. I spoke to lots of very frustrated people who had already voted, but then after Super Tuesday, but then before Super Tuesday, the candidate array really diminished, and they were frustrated that they had wasted their votes. And then the last point about a benefit of ranked choice voting is I am such a strong believer in democracy. So I like the fact that with ranked choice voting, more voters cast ballots because they feel as though their vote is more effective. So with that, I turn it back to you, Hexel.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Harriet. All right, let me get the YouTube back on the, let me stop the share so you guys can see me. All right, so the next speaker is, one second. I'm trying to there we go. All right. I'm trying to take care of both the Facebook feed and the YouTube feed at the same time. And then the Zoom. All right, so our next speaker is Terry Meza. Terry Meza is our state rep from Irving, Texas. She had previously submitted a ranked choice voting bill back in 2019, and she's here to talk about her experience, her perspective, and what she's willing to do going forward. Take it away, Terry.
Thank you. So as a freshman, I'm part of the Flip 12 flip seats. As a freshman, I wasn't allowed to file until I was sworn in. I had to take the oath of office first. So after the first day of the legislature and you take the oath of office, you're allowed to file bills. So I filed 10 election-related bills, including ranked choice voting, or some people call it preferential voting. And as you heard from the previous speakers, this is not an original idea with me. Lots of time, great ideas are not original, but because it had been so successful in other states and other cities, as you heard, I thought it would be a good thing for Texas for the reasons that Harriet described. So we filed a bill for preferential voting or ranked choice voting. All bills have to be filed by early March. 60 days after the legislature starts is the deadline for filing bills. So once the bills are filed, and not until then, bills get assigned to a committee. Once all the bills are filed, then the speaker assigns them to whatever committee he thinks or she thinks is the most appropriate committee for that subject matter. So of course, this bill was assigned to the elections committee in March. And then from there starts the effort to get your bill heard. You wouldn't think it would be such an effort, but it really is, because there's so many bills filed that the committee chair has the power to decide whether or not a bill is going to be heard. So in this particular case, Stephanie Click, a Republican out of Tarrant County, was the elections committee chair. And with all 10 of my election committee bills, anytime I tried to talk to her about any ways to make voting easier, her standard answer was voter fraud. So we have to overcome that myth of voter fraud. And so I'm hoping that this next time it might be a little better, because speaking partisanship here, we're hoping that we will be able to flip the House in 2020, and that if we have a Democratic majority, we'll be able to have a Democratic speaker, which means we might be able to have a Democratic chair, I believe, of the elections committee. And that will be a great first step, because again, like I said, that person's all powerful. Representative Philip Cortez, the Democratic co-chair of the committee, was always very good about signing on to my bills, but he'd give me a little dose of reality anytime he signed on by saying, you know, she's not going to let your bill get heard, but I'll put my name on it in hopes that the co-chair, being a sponsor of the bill, will help some. So I think that when we have a chair who's open to ideas of election reform, a chair who's open to different ways of doing voting, like Hexel gave some examples of same-day voter registration, online voter registration, and other ones, then we can move toward having better ways of doing elections. And I think that's an additional part of what we're talking about here today, kind of a side issue to ranked choice voting, is better ways to do elections. And you know that as far as the military overseas population, it used to be that runoffs were just a couple of weeks after elections, and then they found that that wasn't enough turnaround time for the overseas military voter, and that's why they now are at least 30 days after the election before you have the runoff. So to allow the military votes and so on to get back in. But I'm in favor of that too. That's not part of the bill that I filed, but I think that's a great idea. Anything to help people vote, I'm for. I'm a 40-year member of the League of Women Voters, and so a lot of these ideas that we're talking about, the League of Women Voters is supportive of. And so I mentioned that because that's a great ally for us to have and to have a coalition with, is the League of Women Voters. So those are some of my experiences in filing the bill, and look forward to filing it again. I think I had shared with Hexel that one of the advantages I'll have this time that I did not have last time is that once the November elections are completed, returning legislators have the opportunity to file bills as soon as November. I didn't have that opportunity last time. Even though I'd been elected, I hadn't taken my oath yet, so I had to wait till January. This year, I'll be able to file as early as November. So I'm already looking at the bills that I filed last legislative session to see which ones I'd like to refile. And of course, ranked choice voting, preferential voting is one of those bills that I would like to refile. And so I'm very excited about having the support of these great groups with me in moving forward with this bill. Hexel, I yield my time.
Oh, he's muted, it looks like. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Terry. Yeah, and so this is amazing. So we heard from our three speakers. We're going to move into Q&A next. And so first of all, if you have any questions that you would like to ask one of our speakers on the chat, make sure you direct your messages to Nicholas Curley on the chat, and he is collecting and moderating the questions, and then he'll send it to me. And before I get into questions though, for those of you who have joined us, I'd like to give a basic roadmap or outline of what does the action look like after this meeting. So you guys can get an idea of where do we go from here, right? So we have on this call three of the key players. Harriet with Ranked Choice Voting for Texas. They have been working on this and planning this for a long time. And as Humanity for Texas, we have this grassroots support, and Terry, and hopefully more people like Terry will sponsor the bill that we hopefully, if everything goes according to plan, can get filed as soon as November. And so what does this mean for you guys on the call, as well as anybody that you guys are connected to? Well, the first thing that you guys need to do is make sure that you sign up on both of our websites, humanityfortexas.org and rcvfortexas.org, to make sure you are plugged in with everything that's happening starting tomorrow, right? Because we will need your help every step of the way. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, between now and November, Terry, Harriet's team, and anybody else we can find who's willing to join as a co-sponsor will work on perfecting that bill so that when it gets filed in November, we're ready to rally everyone behind it. And that's why you need to be signed up, so that we can tell you, contact your representative, tell them to support this bill. So between now and November, very critical time period, in addition to being plugged in and waiting for the time to start contacting your representative, we need help in one other way, which is something that Terry and Harriet and ourselves at Humanity Forward Texas going to do, which is look for a Republican representative willing to co-sponsor this bill. And so while we are doing that, at the top with Harriet and Terry and myself, we live in Texas and we have callers from all over the state. And I'm sure at least multiple of you have a Republican representative who can join this effort. So if you know who your representative, or you find out who your representative is, then we encourage you to reach out to them, explain to them what ranked choice voting is, how it will help all parties, not just any one, and that they should get on board with it and contact us so that we can bring them onto the team. And then before we jump into questions, you can find a ton of resources about what is ranked choice voting online. If you go on YouTube or if you go on Google, fairvote.org is a website that has a ton of information, a lot of data sheets, a lot of infographics about ranked choice voting. And we will also be there. We've posted some resources on our social media. You can go there as well. All right. So I'm going to jump into the first question I have prepared. And this first question is for Harriet. Harriet, what are some common fears or concerns around ranked choice voting, and how do you typically answer them?
So the first one is really insulting, which is that some people will say it's too hard, voters get confused. And if the voters in Ireland have been able to do this for decades, and voters in other states walk out of the polls and say, this was easy, not a problem at all, then we Texans are smart enough to be able to handle ranking our choices as well. So that first objection that people make is really offensive. There's no basis in reality. People get as confused just with normal voting as they do with ranked choice voting. Kennedy talked about the number of organizations that use ranked choice voting, like the Academy Awards. Many universities use ranked choice voting for their student organizations. This is really something that we can handle, and no one should say that's a reason not to adopt it. The other complaint that we often hear in Texas is that it is a progressive initiative, and we Texans are more conservative than that. And that also is a misstatement of fact, because if you look at major elections where a third-party candidate wound up changing the end result, if there had been ranked choice voting, then the votes that went for Perot probably would have gone to Bush, and the votes that went for Nader probably would have gone to Al Gore. So sometimes the third party, quote unquote, spoiler votes would go Republican, sometimes they go Democrat. This really is not a partisan issue. It is a nonpartisan improvement to enable each of us to vote for the candidate who we really want to vote for, instead of voting for the major party candidate who we dislike least. So those are two objections that I hear about.
Thank you so much. And one thing I would throw in there is it changes the nature of campaigning as well. And it's something that, a lot of times when we try to analyze it, we look at the tail end, which is after, how the math gets distributed, but even changes the math like up until that point where suddenly candidates are like, oh, there's an advantage to even like courting the supporters of the other side, because that people start to think more broadly about who they should win the votes of rather than just their base. Terry, I have this next question's for you, especially since you've been through the political process of this once before. What would you say are the biggest obstacles that we'll face once we file this legislation? I know you've touched on it a little bit, but just very focused on what are the obstacles and how do we overcome them?
Well, since I'm hopeful about the House for next session, I would say that not only do we need to think about sponsorship from the Republican Party, but we need to think about sponsorship in the Senate, because one of the painful lessons that I learned is that we can do great things in the House, we can get a bill passed, but then it has to go to the Senate. And if you've been following national politics, you see that happening. there too, that the House is doing great things and passing great bills only for them to go over to the Senate and just sit there. So I think it would also be good for us to think about a Senate sponsor. So that way you have a bill filed in the Senate, as well as, you got me to file a bill in the House. But I would also like for us to look for a Senate sponsor. And I don't think there'll be any problem among the Senate Democrats to have a Senate sponsor. Speaking to, if I may, while I'm on, to what we were just talking about before this question, it also helps for coalition building, because the first time I ran, there were 3 of us. There was an Anglo, Hispanic, and African American. 105 is a majority minority district, 60% minorities, with 40% of that being Latinos. 2 out of the 3 candidates were minority candidates, and we had the majority of the vote in the primary election. But majority as in the 2 of us together. I guess that's plurality or something. Anyway, together we had the most votes. I had to go into a runoff with the Anglo candidate, and runoffs have less people that come back. I'd have to tell people, I need you to go vote for me. And they said, I did, Terry, I already voted for you. So I'd have to educate them about, no, but I need you to go back again. And so I didn't win in the runoff. And so if we'd had, we don't know, totally hypothetical, but when you have African-American and a Hispanic candidate who has the majority of the votes as a coalition, then as was pointed out earlier about candidates being nicer to each other, and because less negative campaigning because they want to have the support of the other candidate. Well, I did have the support of the African-American candidate, and she had my support, that if I was in the runoff, she supported me. If she was in the runoff, I supported her. Well, that may have avoided the runoff, and who knows, one of us, maybe me, would have, since I made it into the runoff, would have gotten elected back then. But instead, we had an Anglo candidate, and the people just didn't turn back out to vote that person in the fall. So I think preferential voting helps in that way as far as coalition building, whether it's women candidates or minority candidates or whatever the coalition might be, progressive, whatever coalitions you might think of that you can get together and then have a better chance of a candidate that has your like thinking getting elected than if you don't have that coalition building. So I think it's a great opportunity to do coalition building as well.
Absolutely. I have one more prepared question, and then I'm getting some questions from the audience, which I'll get to. So one more question I had prepared was for Harriet. So Harriet, since we announced this event, we've got a lot of responses online on our different social media platforms. One thing that's kind of been blowing up my phone since we went public with this event are these alternatives to ranked choice voting. So some that have been hitting my inbox are star voting, and there's another one called approval voting. So I was curious, were you aware of these other types, and what are your reactions or responses to these RCV alternatives?
Sure, there are at least half a dozen different alternatives that enable people to vote for more than a single candidate. Approval voting in some ways seems like the easiest, because if there are 5 candidates, you just go down the line. I'm okay with 1, I'm okay with 2, I'm not okay with 3, I'm okay with 4, I'm not okay with 5. So you just check off all of the ones who you would be okay with. And then the candidate that gets the most I'm okay with them votes wins. The problem with that is it doesn't give any weight to how strongly people prefer each of those candidates. So the person who might get the most okays is someone that no one really likes that much, but everyone's sort of okay with them because there's nothing offensive about them. So it's easy to vote that way, but it doesn't necessarily get you the strongest candidate. Star voting is a little bit more complicated. You go through each of the candidates and you assign a value to them. So I can give 5 points to certain candidates and 1 point to some candidates, or no points to some candidates. And then you add up all of the points that each of the candidates gets. And then the 2 candidates who have the most points are then compared to see who had the most first choice votes, who had the most I guess, who had the most first choice votes, and that person wins. So that it just gets a little harder to explain. And in reality, if you look at each of the half dozen or so different ways that you can vote for multiple candidates, no process is perfect. So what I like about ranked choice voting is that that is what is used in most locations now. So it's been tried, it's been tested, and it works. So I would go with the one that we have some experience with. It may not be perfect. Someone can come up with a scenario under which you might be able to do some strategic voting and change the outcome. But in reality, it works very well. It works as well as anything else, and it works far better than our first past the post election way, which we do now, where if you need a majority, you have a runoff. Very few people vote in the runoff. Candidates split the vote. So ranked choice voting, I think, is the way to go, given what we have learned in the last 100 years from places that have used it.
Yeah, that's a great point. And so, yeah, so I've received this question a lot too, and it's pretty much what Harriet said, that, this is ranked choice voting has the maturity compared to a lot of others in terms of having been tried at multiple levels of government, as well as multiple areas of public life. And so one thing I'll reiterate that I said to someone else in private in response to the STAR question was, when I was looking at STAR, looking at breaking it down, how it works, I'm not going to rule out that it's a good method. But the key difference is that ranked choice voting, as Harriet said, has been around for over almost 100 years, has been tried at multiple levels. And so in addition to the math of how it works, the theoretical, we also have a lot of empirical data for what ranked choice voting might end up doing to our elections. STAR voting, as far as I can read it, it has a ton of math behind it. So it's definitely worth looking into and maybe even experimenting. But it was formulated in 2014, I believe, and it hasn't had a chance yet to be tried at a local level or a city level. And so I don't want, if there's any fans of STAR out there, I definitely don't want you guys to give you guys the impression that we are against innovation. But there's this moment where we're already getting pushback from perceived complexity of ranked choice voting. And so the groundswell of support, the maturity, as well as the precedent that we've established with RCV has kind of brought its moment to light now. And who knows, maybe after we've got ranked choice voting in Texas and we've given it a chance and people are like, oh, okay, I'm used to voting for more than one person, then maybe we can start exploring some more advanced methods like STAR. And that's the key thing, is mainly RCV has a track record that we're able to work with. And that's makes it prime for implementation now. All right, so I have some questions. I think I'm going to direct this next one I'm going to give it to Terry, but if Harriet wants to answer this too, she can. Terry, what is the most effective way to reach a local representative to urge them about RCV?
The ways to connect with them or reach them? Well, we
Yeah,
all
or
have
I'll say the
district
most
offices.
effective way to convince them. Yeah.
Well, we all have district offices and they have phone numbers, so you can call. We all have emails. Our first name dot last name at house.texas.gov is the standard email address. So that works for all legislators. So you can email. We get emails on lots of different topics. So certainly you can email on this one. And so those are the two main ways that people communicate with us.
Perfect. And one thing I'll throw out there is that I think if you go through, is this a myth, or you can tell me if this is factual? Representatives tend to give priority to their own constituents. Is that accurate?
That's accurate. That's true.
Gotcha. And so I pointed out,
we represent, and so I'm going to respond more to someone who's from Irving and Grand Prairie than I am to say someone from West Texas or South Texas.
right? Which, by the way, is where I am, and that's how we got connected. So, and I want to emphasize that point, because that's why it's so important on the Humanity Forward front that we get as many people involved as possible, because we need as many supporters in Congress, in the state Congress, to help us out. And so I might be able to reach out to Terry, because she's my representative. But, I might not have as much luck in the district next door, or in Austin, or in San Antonio, or in Houston, or in El Paso, or even in some rural areas like Anderson County. And so wherever you guys are, please reach out to your own representative and encourage other people to reach out to their representative as well, so we can build a wide base of support that we've already started building. But we need everybody to get us across the finish line. I think Terry covered it, but Harriet, did you want to add anything to that question?
No, I think that's fine.
Gotcha. All right, here's another question. What is the best way to apply pressure to the chair in Fort Worth? So Terry gave her story of the election committee chair was the person who's the gatekeeper of whether or not a bill related to elections gets a hearing. And so, building off the point I just made, we need everybody to apply pressure to their own representatives. There's a specific bottleneck with the commission chair. So especially if you live in Fort Worth, tell us the name and the district that the current committee chair resides in, so that we know which representatives and which constituencies need to talk to them. Terry, can you give the answer to that?
Yes, the current elections committee chair is named Stephanie Click, and she's in Tarrant County, and I don't know her district number. I think most of the ones in Tarrant County are in the 90s. So believe it or not, we don't know all of our colleagues' district numbers ourselves. So if y'all don't remember our district numbers, it's okay. We don't remember each other's district numbers all the time either.
District 91, yeah, in Fort Worth.
There you go. Thank you.
Yeah, and so I see some Tarrant County faces in this Zoom meeting. So if you are hearing this is your call to action.
So
remember that if the Democrats take the majority and there's a elected Democratic speaker, then she may not be the election committee chair when we're going to battle on this in the spring, and next year rather.
Gotcha.
So one of the volunteer opportunities that we like to talk to people about is the option of forming a local group where you live to figure out if there are additional things that may work well in your community that you can do to help us get the bills passed. So if we have a group of people from Fort Worth, they might be able to put their heads together and figure out the best way to approach the legislator.
Right. And that sounds a lot like, again, a plug for our group, but it sounds a lot like a Yang Gang in that area.
There you go. A call out to all the Yang Gang.
Yes. And so, all right, here's another question I received. Are people hesitant about ranked choice voting because they want to keep runoff elections? So I think I'll ask Terry this first, and again, Harriet, if you have an insight on this. Are there people who benefit from the current runoff system, or who benefit from not having ranked choice voting?
Yes, the less people vote, the more likely are that Republicans win, and the less people that vote, the more likely that an establishment candidate wins, the more likely an incumbent wins. So the part of the reason why I'm so in favor of ranked choice voting, having had to go into a runoff myself and having that experience, is that it gives an opportunity for the people to express their choice when you have the most people there voting during the primary. That's when the most people vote. And then you come back 30 days for a runoff, and the drop off and the turnout is just huge. So it's good to have people's choices when the most people are there voting, rather than when only a few people come back. So then we're subjected to being represented by somebody who was not voted in by the majority of the voters. They were voted in by a few people that came back to the runoff.
Right. And so I want to touch. Go ahead, Harriet.
I have a slightly different perspective on that, and it may sound cynical, but I think that the people who don't want ranked choice voting are the people who are currently in power. And the system as it currently exists is what got them into power, and they're just nervous that if there's a different system, they might not make it again. So it's really interesting to me. The state of Utah has approved ranked choice voting at the county level at the option of the county. And that initiative was led by the Republicans in Utah. In other states, it's really been Democrats who've led it. So I think it's just people in power don't like to give up power. And if someone other than the people in power get to decide who's nominated, and it's pretty clear that either the Republican or the Democrat's going to win because people don't want to waste their vote on a third party candidate, that's why they don't like ranked choice voting.
Yeah. So you and I really didn't disagree, because you might remember that in my remarks, I said establishment, incumbent, Republican. So you just stated it much more plainer.
Nonpartisan.
Nonpartisan.
Yeah. Well, I think, I think Harriet, you guys touched on, you guys are basically making the same answer. I mean, I think Harriet touches down to the foundation of why that is, because, to Harriet's point, it does support establishment more. And then to Terry's point, the establishment, at least in the state of Texas, at least in this point of time, happens to be, the Republicans. And so, of course, I want to make sure that, not left outright forward, and we do need those Republican support to get this through. And so, but that, I think, recognizing that bias is important when you do go to your Republican representative, because that will be on the back of their mind. And so we encourage everyone to go to your representative and keep that bias, don't think of it as a token against them, but see it as, okay, this is the concern or fear that we need to be able to address for them. And maybe the way I might approach it is say, hey, this can help your party too, because I'm not going to name names, but how many, every party goes to this, but how often in your party does your party elect the person that's not ideal? Or maybe you can find a better representative for your party. And so that's just one possibility. Again, my point there is, don't use the bias against them. Just recognize that it exists, so that when you do talk to them, you can speak on their level.
I think it's important what you said, Hexel, about recognizing what their interests might be. So that's why I would think, if I were approaching a Republican about ranked choice voting, is to talk to them about how I know that they are fiscal conservatives, that they care about not wasting money and not spending money unnecessarily, and how ranked choice voting is a great money saver. Runoff elections are expensive and very few people show up. Let's get the voters while the most of them there, and you save all that money from having runoff elections with a few people turning out. And so that might appeal to our Republican colleagues who like to be fiscal conservatives. Not that Democrats aren't conservative fiscally, it's just that they're kind of like known for that and wear that badge of honor. And so I think we could appeal to them on that level, that this is something that would save us a lot of money.
Absolutely.
Yep. Fantastic. All right, another question I have here. In fact, it got filmed multiple times, so it looks like people really want to know. Terry and Harriet, would the two of you be willing to co-author an op-ed for RCV for Texas?
Absolutely.
All right, so
sure.
Watch out. We got our dynamic duo putting out their manifesto.
I did have an op-ed in the Dallas Morning News on a vote by mail, which was another one of my bills last session. I had a bill to vote by mail being something that would be available to every registered voter, that all they had to do was ask for a vote by mail, apply for it, and anyone who asked for one could have one. And so they no longer have to be in a category like disabled or seniors out of town. And so many of you on this Zoom may be too young to remember, and some even who might have been around to vote back then just may have forgotten. But it used to be that early voting was not available to everybody. It used to be that early voting, you had to be in one of those categories. You had to be senior, disabled, out of town to be able to early vote. And then after having early voting for a while, they said, hey, this is so great. We just ought to open this up to anybody who wants to. And you didn't have to. Of course, you could wait until Election Day. So I see maybe it evolving, vote by mail evolving that same way, that I think we should have, and of course the coronavirus has shown us the importance of vote by mail, right? So it's been more of a topic this year than it was when I filed it last year. But that's another thing that I'm in favor of, is vote by mail being something that's open to everyone. And so we had an op-ed on that in the Dallas Morning News. And I think certainly with Harriet's expertise together, my legislative experience, we could do a great op-ed that we could get in the Dallas Morning News for sure.
Hey, that'd be
and maybe
excellent.
some other papers too.
You know, if we could get an op-ed in the newspaper, I think that'll be excellent in promoting all three sides of this triangle. And this is kind of my segue into the end of this program. I think I'll keep it on for a few minutes that we can, you know, get some Zoom banter in. But I do need to wrap it up because we're almost at 6 o'clock. But, you know, this meeting, we have three organizations involved, right? So we have Harriet as the policy advocate organization with Ranked Choice Voting for Texas. We have our legislative sponsor, which is Terry Meza for state rep in Irving. And we have Humanity Forward Texas, which is the grassroots organizing side of this equation. And I think we have a winning formula there because we hit all sides of this. I think having the expertise plus the sponsorship plus the grassroots are what is necessary to make this work. And in order for this to work, we need, you know, to nurture all those sides. And so if we can get in the news and we get more people joining the grassroots side to help us, you know, push this forward, then we'll have a better chance at winning. All right. So with that, I want to give each of our speakers, well, once again, thank you guys so much for jumping on. I want to give each of our speakers a chance to get some last words in, 30 minutes to 60 seconds. Kennedy, on behalf of Dallas Humanity Forward Texas, do you have any final words to add?
It's great to be back and doing Zoom calls. I'm excited to see everyone that we haven't seen since the world ended. I'm excited to start talking to everyone again. Be sure to look at Facebook and Twitter and start keeping up with stuff because we're going to do more stuff like this. That's my...
Absolutely. Yes, I am also really happy to be looking at the gallery view and seeing all of these familiar faces. Austin, I see you. Terry, final words.
There are more than one way to accomplish things. Not everything has to be accomplished through the state legislature. So I think some of the questions asked about, is there any other way to do it besides the state legislature? And I'd like to give an example to that since I saw that question across the bottom. For example, I had sat right down next to her on the House floor in her deskmate's chair to talk to Stephanie Click about countywide voting. And you'd say, well, we had countywide voting if you're in Dallas County. Well, we have that. Well, yes, you do in Dallas County, but not throughout the state. So my bill was to take that and allow it to be something that all counties throughout the state of Texas could have the right to vote anywhere in the county on an election day. So I sat down to her to talk about that, to try to convince her to have that bill heard in her committee. And she said, no, I'm not sure that I think that's such a good idea. And I said, well, you know, in Tarrant County, in your county, they're considering that right now. The elections administrator is holding meetings open to the public for people to come and hear about how countywide voting would work and to give their input. And she said, yes, I know, but I'm just not convinced that that's a good thing. So it went before the county commissioners. I wasn't sure about it, but because they have 3 Republicans and 2 Democrats, because it's 2 and 2 county commissioners, and then the Tarrant County county judge is a Republican, so there are 3 votes to 2, but they voted to have countywide voting in Tarrant County. So I was like, yes, take that, Stephanie Click. You got countywide voting whether you wanted it or not. So yes, there are sometimes other ways to do things, but wouldn't it be great if we could have that legislation through the legislature where it's something that applies statewide and we don't have to do the battle like county by county, jurisdiction by jurisdiction, but we can have ranked choice voting statewide. So I'm looking forward to working with all of you in making that happen next legislative session.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you so much, Terry. Harriet, final words on behalf of Ranked Choice Voting for Texas.
Okay, so as I said at the beginning, ranked choice voting is not a silver bullet that will cure everything that ails our political system, but I think it is a really good first step and it has significant benefits. So I think we should do this as a first step because it has made a difference in other locations by decreasing negative campaigning, leading to more discussion of issues and helping get candidates elected with broader voter support. So I hope that everyone on this line will tell all their friends and organizations that they're part of to sign up on our website so we can contact you at the right time and you can inundate your legislators and ask them to support ranked choice voting. So I look forward to this partnership. Thanks for including me, and let's get to it.
Fantastic. All right. So all you guys on the Zoom, as well as on the Facebook and YouTube who are watching, if your fingers are itching, what do you click next? What do you type next? You type humanityforwardtexas.org, you click volunteer, and you put in your information, and then you open a new tab. You go to rcv4texas.org. I think you click, you'll find it.
Get involved.
Go in there, yeah, and type in your email so that you can get the call to action. I recommend doing both because you'll be receiving weeklies from Humanity Forward Texas and quarterlies and or time to act now emails from Harriet through RCV for Texas. And follow our social media, Humanity Forward Texas on Facebook and Instagram. We're also at Humanity Texas on Twitter. And we will be keeping you all posted every step of the way. And so if you want to take action, if you want to make this happen, if you want to fix our broken election system, then the best thing you can do right now is to follow us and tell all of your friends and family to get connected as well, because we need those numbers. We need that groundswell of grassroots support. With that,
Hexel, for clarification, when you
oh, sorry, Terry, did you say something? It looks like your video froze. Oh, uh-oh. We lost you. All right. Well, thank you guys so much. In fact, I'm going to sign off on the Facebook and the YouTube now. And stream. And
So I was just saying, Hexel, for clarification, when you gave out those two sites for people to go visit after the call, and you say for Texas, was that the number 4 in both cases? Or was it
it's the word for FOR. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I just wanted you to get that out there so people would know which one you meant.
Yes. And okay, and we're done. Although on Facebook, it's still taking a sec. Oh wait, I know what to do. I'm trying to figure out how do I stop streaming on Facebook.